All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today we're going to be discussing the Kantian turn, metaphysics from Immanuel Kant to the 20th century. Really, we're going to be stopping with Heidegger. And this is going to be a half and half lecture today. We're going to be getting into the weeds of what is the philosophy of Immanuel Kant? Why is he so important? Why is his philosophy considered a sort of Copernican revolution in regards to metaphysics and such? That's what we're going to be addressing today. And so we're going to have a bit of an opening monologue, trying to unpack and how Kant influenced, again, his critique of pure reason, as some of you guys may be familiar with. Some of you may took a sort of introduction to philosophy, of which most philosophy professors then will educate people on the critique of pure reason and such. My goal is to unpack some of this stuff. So if you are not familiar with any of these ideas, logical positivism, German idealism, the methodology of phenomenology, well, that's exactly what we are doing today. So we're going to be needing everybody to put on their thinking caps, okay? It's going to be a little bit of some highfalutin language, but my goal is to break it down as clearly as possible. So we're going to be, again, discussing his impact and looking at, like, what are these a priori categories of understanding? What is this synthetic relationship between the world that is with again, our consciousness, our cognitive faculties. And why was Immanuel Kant critiquing pure reason? Interestingly enough, he was doing it to actually preserve free will. And this is where he actually then argues in favor of God due to morality. And this is a term I've recently used called like deontological deontological ethics. This gets again related to Kant and regarding to one's moral duty, one's moral absolute duty. And so the reason why Kant wanted to critique the utilization of pure reason was because due to Newton and Newtonian physics, and as we would suspect, the growth of the Enlightenment, there were this preeminence that God is basically being relegated to the edges. If not, again, we'll see maybe a generation later with Nietzsche, God is dead. But the idea that we really don't need God anymore. This whole business of metaphysics is sort of going by the well, he highlighted the limits of it, but he was actually making space for belief in God inside of an incredibly rationalistic system due to the again the sequiturs, the logical follows of Newtonian physics, the idea that the whole universe is just determined. It's just a determined machine. So we're going to break down all this stuff, and I have a paper. So the majority of the stream is going to be a paper that we're going to be reading through. Now, as the thumbnail and the lecture says, this is a half and half. Again, shout out to my buddy Jay Dyer. And I got to do a half and half because I need people to sign up to the website to become members. If you want to help me out, becoming a member to the website is huge for aiding the ability for me to create these streams. And again, I'm getting married, and there's just this growth of anxiety in me of trying to make this thing a real business. And Jay Dyer's, one of his best advice to me was, man, you got to do more half and half streams. And so that's exactly what I'll be doing today. So we're not going in this stream to really dive into the influence on German idealism, the methodology of phenomenology, and British empiricism, or what's considered 19th century empiricism. Those are going to be for the second half. And that's again over at my website. So let me just put this up real quick. Again, the second half is over at the website. And so, guys, if you want to have access to the second half of today's lecture, please become a website member. And again, I have multiple payment options. You can pay per month, or you can get 2 free months by just purchasing for a full year. And if you want, again, you can purchase for a full year. You're locked in. You'll have access to tons of exclusive video content. And so if somebody, for example, were to sign up, I got a whole video library of content like this. So again, a little personal journey, a documentary on iconography, all types of stuff over here. Psychedelic Jesuit caves, all types of stuff. So if, again, this is all for a $5 a month membership. You can have access to all this exclusive video content. Yes, anyways, that would be a great way to support. Oh gosh, there we go. Let's go back. Here we go. Library, education. And so here again, we got like it. I'm going to start doing a lot more content over at the website because, again, I need some help. I need some help with the business. I need some support. So again, major shout out to Gigi for becoming a YouTube member today. That's another great way to help me. Is for $5. You can become a YouTube COTEL Crew member, and you can get access to exclusive emojis. Or again, you can become a website member. Please use this link I'm posting right in the live chat. You can become a website member, and there's 3 different tier options. Also, if anybody wants to schedule a one-on-one session, you can do so with this link right here. We got 2 ready to go for this Wednesday. And if you are free this Wednesday, we could hurry and set one up as well with that link. And if anybody would like to sponsor a stream, you can do so with the link that actually I just shared. And then here is the link for the one-on-one session. So Anyways, guys, I need some help, so that's why we're going to start doing some half and halves, and this is a half lecture. So, okay, let's get into the topic at hand here. Kant, Immanuel Kant. Who is he? Why is he important? You probably heard his name. We're going to be talking about metaphysics. And metaphysics is a real difficult topic to sort of put your finger on exactly what it is. And I did a stream with Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, of which was like 3 hours or so, where we covered the history of metaphysics. So that was a large, encompassing stream. This one's going to be much more narrowed to a historical context. And so if we, let me pull up a different screen here. If we look at what like the Stanford page says on metaphysics, again, not easy to say what metaphysics is. Ancient and medieval philosophers might have said that metaphysics was like chemistry, astrology, to be defined by its subject matter. Metaphysics was the science that studied being as such. Being as such. Again, what is being? This is a difficult thing. Like, when you're talking about this whole philosophical tradition is focusing on being. What does that mean exactly? Well, we're going to unpack this. So Immanuel Kant was a gentleman from the 18th century, as we see here, from 1724 to 1804, so right into the 19th century. He was Prussian, and his transcendental idealism, or his critique of pure reason, again, was a sort of Copernican revolution. And what was the revolution about exactly? Well, metaphysics has to do with, again, well, for Aristotle, these were categories of reality itself, these rational categories like substance and quantity and quality and place and relation and time and position. So space and time are part of, again, understanding metaphysics. Metaphysics is, again, these grander ideas of existence, of being. How do we understand it? What is ultimately real? Position, state, action, affection. And so these 10 categories for Aristotle were believed to be rational categories that were in the world. And this metaphysical presupposition, again, we've talked about the one and the many. This, again, would fall back into metaphysics. Which one's more real, the one or the many? The category of dog, or all the different dogs you can see in the world? Chihuahuas, wolves, pit bulls, German shepherds. What's more real? And this is even going to tie into where Kant. So if, again, it's kind of difficult, but you see this X right here? You see this X? Is that if there's an X, Kant is right in the center. And you had these two streams of philosophical thought. You have this rationalistic tradition, which would include Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, this understanding that we can come to truth through sort of rational apprehension, through rational deductive apprehension of these categories, these rational categories, these Aristotelian categories that are perceived to be part of reality. And you had the empirical tradition. And this would be people like Locke, Berkeley, Hume, much more skeptical of these grand analysis of, again, the one and the many, metaphysics, the nature of being. They're really just focused on what they can observe, what they can measure, what they can empirically or inductively understand. That is reality. And that is then how we come to knowledge. And this worldview, this empirical rational worldview, along with the rationalism of the sort of Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza stream, they come together at Kant, where Kant then critiques both of them. The rationalist, he critiques the idea that we can just purely use reason and come to these objective understandings about how the world is. And he critiques the empiricist by saying the world out here isn't actually what you think it is. We can't actually know it in and of itself. And so Kant is described as a sort of critical philosophy, critically examining the conditions that allow to make metaphysics possible, analyzing the epistemological foundations of metaphysics themselves. And so his critique of pure reason is saying, hey, actually, you don't know what this is in and of itself. And he breaks from the entire scholastic tradition in philosophy up to that point, because in scholasticism, they didn't question metaphysics. They didn't question the reality of these 10 categories, these Aristotelian categories. But Kant says, wait a minute, I actually think that they are part of our again, for an Orthodox, we'd say our noetic, or he would say our conscious or mental faculty, our perceptions of the world itself. And so he believes that there is a synthetic bringing together of the world out here and the interior world. And so he believed that space and time were actually inside of here. And the experience of space and time is sort of a synthetic coming together of the exterior, the noumena, the world in and of itself that we can't know, and the phenomena, the world that we actually experience. And this is part of his big breakdown, is that he places these categories that Aristotle had objectively out in the world because they're rationally apprehendable. He said, well, actually, I don't think they're out here. I think they're inside your head. And I think that this synthetic process is why then we need to pull back on the pure ability of reason. Now, obviously, the worship of reason aligns with the sort of tradition of worshiping man as the measure of all things, right? And just so people are clear, logic and reason are two different things, okay? So logic is out in the world. There's laws of logic. And then reason is a sort of capacity within the individual, within man, within women too, but the individual. So it's a capacity that we have to rationally understand something. Reason can be used in a lot of different ways. Then we can rationalize things in a lot of different ways. But the critique of pure reason then was the critique of metaphysical knowledge itself. And he says that these 10 categories, he actually adds 2 more. So Kant has 12 categories. And he says, you know what? These are actually a priori categories within the consciousness of people themselves. And this synthetic apprehension of the noumena comes together with these categories to create the phenomena that we can then experience the world. That was the Copernican revolution. You see, it's subtle, but it's very, very, very important. Do we know the world out there in and of itself? Well, he says we don't. And he makes a lot of arguments for that being the case. And we're going to lay those out here in a few. So this is why Kant is so important, because he transitioned, he changed philosophy. Now, I'm not here to argue for Kant, because we as Orthodox Christians actually believe that the world is real in and of itself out here. So I do not believe that these categories are purely rational or are purely a priori inside of our heads, and there's this synthetic process. I'm not arguing for Kant today, okay? We as Orthodox Christians are not Kantians. However, the point is to understand better the influence and the import that Immanuel Kant has on the history of philosophy, and why Kant is considered a sort of apex point where there is a Copernican revolution there. There's what's called the Kantian turn. And it moves into 2 different methodologies for the apprehension of knowledge. If we assume that the world isn't in and of itself real out here, that we can truly know it in and of itself, that I can truly know in and of itself what this is, it calls into questions the length of the epistemological viability of empiricism. To say that a different way, if we're just going to use the scientific method, which is, again, philosophically sort of described as the hypothetico-deductive model, we come up with the hypotheses, then we do experiments, and then we deduct to knowledge claims from there. But are those ultimately real claims if the world isn't real in and of itself? The answer would be no. And so at the same time, Kant then puts limits on this idea of pure reason, again, tying to Descartes, tying to Leibniz, tying to Spinoza, that we can sort of just sit back in our armchairs and we can rationally apprehend the entirety of the universe. He says, well, that's not true too, because he saw reason as coming to, with Newtonian physics, coming to a point where everything's so determined, there's going to be no room for God. And so he saw his critique of pure reason as actually, like I said, allowing for belief. This is a way which, some people may not articulate Kant, but he was trying to do something, if you want to say, in a way, Christian. And so he makes a moral claim for God, and that's why he uses a sort of deontological ethics, and we'll get into that. So Hume Hume sort of wakes, again, Kant is famous for saying that Hume wakes him up out of his philosophical slumber. And so Hume highlighted that, as a total skeptic, you actually can't know that the world out here is totally real. And this is what sort of woke Kant up to sort of come up with something like deal with this. If the world isn't totally knowable out here, what are the consequences of that? For Hume, he even highlights the limits of the epistemic claims that a total skeptic like himself, an atheist, rationalist, empiricist could make, because like Hume highlights, again, I have a book over here, and maybe I should grab some of these books if you guys want to get into metaphysics, some that you could purchase. But like Hume makes a point that, look, as a total skeptic, I can't say that the sun's going to rise tomorrow because I need to observe it. And me just using probability is no longer using the scientific method, which in the scientific method, I'm using means and averages to use probability to come up with an answer. I'm presupposing it. Therefore, again, there's all these limits for the total skeptic in regards to knowledge claims. So Hume wakes Kant up, and Kant wants to know, are there any universal concepts every person brings in their quest for knowledge? He says, yes, an a priori structure. We have a structure of understanding that pre-exists any actual experience. Okay, so for Kant, then, humans have these a priori categories. For Aristotle, they were out in the world. They're rationally apprehended. For Kant, they're a priori. They're in here. They're in your head. And so he creates, again, this is going to be important for our conversation today, the phenomena and the noumena distinction. The noumena is the thing in of itself. This is my topo chico in and of itself, the noumena. I can't know that according to Kant's critique. And he demonstrates that so his critique on the knowability of the exterior world, he uses a bunch of logical proofs to demonstrate this. A lot of antinomies, which we'll get into here. So he creates these distinctions between the phenomena, that which I actually experience as my Topo Chico mineral water, and the actual Topo Chico mineral water in its essence, in its substance, in its nature. I can't know that totally, right? And so Kant, as I said, subjectivizes space and time. It's now within the head of the individual. And this is going to then allow something like idealism, or a new methodology known as phenomenology, that you're going to study the structures of experience and consciousness. That's what we're going to do. So after Kant, we have, again, empiricism, or British empiricism as it's described. It's the knowledge or justification comes only primarily from sensory experience. But again, if Kant is right, and he's saying that sensory experience isn't totally going to be reliable in regard to its knowability of the world, because we can't know the world totally in and of itself out here. Therefore, what is empiricism actually giving us? Well, empiricism is using structures of our understanding to then come to conclusions out in the world. So empiricism is focused on sensory experience. It's one of several competing views within epistemology, along with rationalism and skepticism. And so rationalism would be this other again, this would be Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz. Here we go, right here. So Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz. That regards reason as the chief source and test of knowledge, or any view appealing to reason as a source of knowledge or justification, often in contrast to other possible sources of knowledge, such as faith, tradition, and sensory experience. And so Kant wants to give some space to, he's not saying that we can't use reason, and he's not saying that we need to totally ignore sensory experience, but he's saying that these are limited in their capacity for their epistemic knowability. Okay. So this leads to a new methodology, which becomes German idealism. But when I say phenomenology, this is focused on the philosophy, and it kind of hits at its beginning as a methodology here with Hegel, because he's part of, again, the phenomenology of spirit, because it's now the focus, and we can get into it real quick. Phenomenology is a new method that is focused on the structures of experience and consciousness, because if we can't fully know the world in of itself, what's the best thing we can know? The idealists say, Kant, you're right. We'll adopt you. Copernican revolution here, the Kantian turn. Okay, we'll adopt Kant's distinction between phenomena and noumena. Now what we're going to do is focus on our own subjective experience, because if our own subjective experience, if we can come to know that, then we can come to know the totality of creation, or the universe. So phenomenology is a descriptive method describing phenomenon. It's not a demonstrative method of dogmatic metaphysics anymore. So they do away with the dogmatic metaphysics before Kant or scholasticism, or what we would consider a part of logos theology, right? They'd be very critical of this worldview because they want to just use naturalism. They just want to observe the world to come to ultimate conclusions, which we would reject. Obviously, that's why we do tag and all this different stuff. We precept people that do this type of thing. And in a way, Kant was precepting both the rationalists and the empiricists, which is quite interesting. But idealism is a direct reaction against mechanistic empiricism, and in turn privileges the self. They are continuing the Kantian Copernican revolution. It is a new logic, a logic of process. Phenomenology is a logic of process. And so it's not a syllogistic logic, right? Syllogisms, A, B, therefore C, right? It's not a syllogistic logic. It's a process logic. Syllogisms are unchanging universal concepts. Change is more ultimate than permanence, making a claim. This is what phenomenology is doing. This is the wake of Kant. Heraclitus versus Parmenides, right? This is an ancient Greek dialectic here. Phenomenology is an epistemology stressing direct awareness, right? Because if the realist thing is our a priori categories, we should then be focusing on our consciousness as opposed to the exterior world. This is, again, one of their beliefs. So within which there is a gradual clarifying of ideas by stressing the epistemic importance of direct awareness. It is a new metaphysics stressing idealism rather than materialism and dualism. Everything is mind, spirit, and self, a developmental monism, evolutionary idealism. And it's immanentistic. The ground of being and divine being is immanent in its entirety, profound theological consequences. This is very different from what becomes 19th century empiricism, which is the extension of Enlightenment objectivity into the hypothetico-deductive model or method of science. We're going to come up with hypotheses. We're going to measure and average the world to come up with knowledge claims. That's what empiricism does. And so therefore 19th century empiricism is also affected by Kant and says, okay, maybe we can measure an average, and we don't fully know what the world is in and of itself, that noumena. But that's the best way that we can come to know what the world is. They're not interested in people's subjective categories, people's personal experience. That's idealism. That's the people who are trying to study these a priori categories and relationships, right? And so empiricism says, okay, Kant, maybe you're right, but the best thing we can do is measure and average the world using inductive, scientific, hypothetico-deductive model. And so it's an extension of that scientific method to the human sciences, to fields such as psychology, sociology, politics, and ethics. This is where we get utilitarianism, is coming out of that sort of 19th century empirical model influenced again by Kant. Development of phenomenalism, which is not phenomenology. Okay? This is a really important thing that people get tricked on. So, if we're looking at empiricism is going to focus on phenomenalism. Phenomenalism is the idea that there's phenomena out here. Phenomenology is studying those things, but it's not saying the only thing that exists is phenomenon. Empiricism is. Okay, so 19th century empiricism is focused on phenomenalism, saying really the only thing that's actually here is the stuff out here. And phenomenology is studying phenomenon from a subjective perspective. Those are two separate things. Don't get tricked on that. So it's an development of phenomenalism, anti-realism, anti-metaphysics. All we know is the appearance of phenomenon. If that's all we know, then we need to measure and average phenomenon. That is the the trajectory that 19th century empiricism goes. And we see names like John Stuart Mill, Ernst Mach, um, Bertrand Russell comes out of this tradition, and that's where they develop logical positivism. And again, my paper, we're going to read it, it eventually goes into that, but again, that's all going to be for the second half. That's going to be for the website members. So German idealism, and then the what's called British 19th century British empiricism are two breakoffs after Kant. Okay, so let's go back to Kant here for a second and talk a little bit about his metaphysics. Okay, so what exactly is this critique of pure reason doing more clearly? Again, a lot of this stuff is hard to track. That's why we got to have our thinking caps on. So Newtonian physics is really describing the subjective structures of our thinking as opposed to it being the way that the world actually is. This is what Kant is claiming, because Newtonian physics would insinuate that the world is totally deterministic. It's already determined by these laws, right? It looks like it's storming outside. So if my internet goes out, guys, that is due to the weather. That is due to the weather for sure. And guys, also, if you want to show some love and support, you could send a super chat in using the Streamlabs link or YouTube, both of which I'd be greatly appreciative of. So thank you guys for that. Okay, so Newtonian physics is really only describing the subjective categories, because Kant's categories, his 12 categories, adding 2 categories onto Aristotle's categories. Aristotle, like I said, has them out here. They're rational. They're part of the world. Kant's now placing them inside the conscious mind. So he uses then what's called the transcendental dialectic. And this is it breaks down, and we're going to break this down into the transcendental aesthetic, which is sense perception, and the transcendental analytic, the judgments we make, the understanding we have because of our a priori categories of concepts which interpret experience. Is a rational metaphysic possible? Kant asks. He answers by saying no. A rational metaphysic is not possible, according to Kant, at least not the certainty of rational metaphysics. So he actually has a metaphysics of morals. Again, that's where he's going to make his stake, and his claim for God is going to be a moral argument. And that's where he really does this after his critique of pure reason and what's called the metaphysics of morality. So he's using the transcendental dialectic. Kant shows that the metaphysician proofs don't work anymore. That Kant shows the limits of knowledge to make room for religious beliefs, because he still wants to maintain his religious beliefs and show that, yeah, using pure reason and a naturalistic approach to the world, you can sort of butt God out of the equation. But he's saying his arguments is that you can't in regards to moral duty, deontological ethics. We're not going to get into that. We're focused on metaphysics, but he's going to show the limits to make room for beliefs, the limits of knowledge to make. So he uses paralogisms, a step that goes beyond that which logic would. So it's a non sequitur in a way. It's a paralogism. It's a step beyond. And he's going to use antinomies. And antinomies are when an argument for and against a thesis can both be given. And so he's going to use logic, and I'm going to show you guys this here in a few. He's going to use logic to show that an argument for and an argument against can both be true. And if that's the case, well, then that shows the limits of a sort of purely rationalistic approach. And so, therefore, against the laws of logic, that something can be both A and not A, which violates the laws of logic. And he's going to demonstrate that he can make a claim that will violate the laws of logic. I'm going to show you this here in a few. And then the transcendental ideal, the ideal of human thought, which seeks to round out our understanding of things, but the ideal is not proven, it's postulated. To preserve freedom and morality, Kant wants to guard against the dangers of materialism. Kant will argue against soul substance. And this is cogito ergo sum, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Well, cogito is a property. Regs cogitans is the substance. So Kant believes what he's saying, what Descartes is saying is that he's a thinking substance. He's a thinking essence. He's a thinking nature. Kant says, I'm not so sure about that. And so Kant believes it to be an unknown relationship
between substance and accidents. An a priori concept of substance intrudes into what we can really know. Substance intrudes mind-body problem. Kant believes mind nor body are known as substance. Mind-body problem, relation between the two substances, is, he argues, a pseudo-problem and created by our intrusion of substance, which he's then putting back into, again, these cognitive a priori categories. So this is, again, there's more I could unpack here, but I don't want to get too convoluted before we go through the paper, because the paper, as we move through it, is much more explicit and easier to follow. So let's just sort of dive into that paper now. So let me find that. Okay, here we go. Okay, here we go. So this is Metaphysics from Kant to Heidegger. This is a paper that I wrote. And again, I'm going to do this. We're only going to read half this paper. We're going to read through Kant, and we're going to end right before it gets into 19th century empiricism and German idealism. Again, if you want to watch the second half of the stream, you're going to have to become a website member. That's one of the great ways you can support me if you choose to do so. I'd greatly appreciate that. So here we go. Let's read this paper, and it's going to help clarify some of the things that I've just opened and talked about to you guys at this point. So Metaphysics from Kant to Heidegger. This paper is a historical overview of metaphysical philosophy, starting with Immanuel Kant and discussing his influence upon 19th century empiricism and German idealism. The different methodologies taken up by the empirical and the idealist projects will be reflective of the general split in metaphysical philosophy between the analytic and the continental tradition. So the analytic, you can think of the Anglosphere. So all the English-speaking countries generally were more analytic dominated in their philosophical departments, all right? Where European philosophy was much more continental. That's a term that's used. So what's the difference between continental and analytic philosophy? It's the Kantian turn. The continental tradition is going to be focused on the idealistic approach, phenomenology, studying the structures of consciousness. That's where we get existentialism. That's where we get, some of the French intellectuals, the German intellectuals, Heidegger, for example, Husserl. These are going to be people focusing on the structures of consciousness, continental philosophy, as opposed to analytical philosophy, which is understanding the world through empiricism, logical categories. This paper does not intend to elucidate the entirety of various metaphysical systems from a variety of philosophers and traditions, but within the brevity of this paper, accurately address Kant's influence upon two main currents of metaphysical philosophy into the 20th century. The two currents being 19th century empiricism and logical positivism, as well as the phenomenological methodology used by German idealism, phenomenology, and existentialism. Metaphysics has been a very important topic of emphasis throughout the history of both philosophy and theology in an attempt to better grasp the nature of being. From Parmenides to today, metaphysics still plays an important role in philosophy. Some scholars have discarded it due to metaphysical abstraction and questions concerning its epistemological certainty, while others have appreciated a resurgence in light of logical analysis of ordinary language, logical entities, metaethics, and the mind-body problem, etc. Metaphysics as a term describing a particular branch of philosophical inquiry began with the title applied to Aristotle's first philosophy. This first philosophy was because its primary concern was with being, a quality underlying not only the universe as a whole, but also the transient existence of humanity itself. Why is there something rather than nothing? The fact existence even exists has been a source of astonishment as well as admiration for those attempting to provide a rational explanation. In the effort to rationally apprehend being, philosophers throughout the ages have had to ask questions that go beyond the limitations of mere empirical observation. Such questions and topics primarily under ontological consideration include the relationship between universals and particulars, the one and the many, identity and change, space and time, causality and effect, necessity and contingency, determinism and free will, mind and matter, to name a few. The sheer perplexity and immensity of the question of being has led the more skeptically minded to dismiss metaphysics as futile, questioning the certainty of anything that could be known about it, while others see metaphysics as the primary importance rooted within the ultimate and mystical reality of God himself. Whether one has taken being as too general of a topic for inquiry or not, that is still to take a metaphysical position on the nature of existence and our epistemic ability to describe it. So the general themes of metaphysics up to Immanuel Kant. Here we go. So this is an attempt to give a very brief history on why Kant is important and what was going on in philosophy up to him. So to generally describe the history of metaphysics over a span of roughly 2,200 years is a laughable and impossible feat. However, to start simply with Kant's transcendental method and then discuss the profound impact he has had on philosophy is to start in the middle of a conversation with no context. Before Aristotle and his books on first philosophy, metaphysical questions and speculations concerning the nature of being were risen by pre-Socratics such as Thales, who believed all things were made of water, Anaximenes, who believed all things were made of air, Parmenides, who claimed that the material nature was unchanging, and Heraclitus, who argued that nature is always changing, as you can never step into the same river twice. If we focus metaphysics as a study concerned with nature of being, questions addressing the identity of the fundamental Urstoff, German for primary matter of the material world, is central to metaphysical speculation. What is the world made of? What is being actually made of is the question. If we begin to think of metaphysics as more of an a priori and transcendental investigation into the nature of the world, such as the work of Plato and his ideal forms, we can see the metaphysical analysis shift in focus. Identifying the underlying material that unifies creation is less interesting to that compared to the immaterial archetypal structures that provide form to the material itself. What am I saying there? I'm saying that for Plato, what unifies the totality of creation? The ideal forms. It's again the one and the many. It's the one. The one is what unifies the whole thing, not the many, not a material, not water, not air, not fire, not something like this. Plato's making a different argument. He's saying my metaphysics is going to begin with the ideal forms, the good. For him, a demiurgic logos, right? So moving forward, whereas the Pythagoreans privileged plurality to the practical exclusion of the one, Plato reconciles the multiplicity of particular forms in existence with that of the ultimate reality of the ideal one. Platonic epistemology clearly implied that the universal categories of thought were objective, in fact, more real than the material observations of the senses. You understand? Plato, and this is where Descartes, Spinoza, Leibniz, they're making the rationalistic argument that the categories of mind are actually more real than the physical world. More real, you see. The empiricists are making the opposite claim. The world is more real than whatever's going on in your head. That's the empirical angle at this. Okay. So not only do we then see the Platonic theory of forms addresses the primacy of the universality over that of multiplicity, but also the reality of idealism over that of materialism. Questions concerning the real existence of universals, later referred to as logical entities within the philosophy of language, are still central metaphysical questions that will continue well past Kant and into the 21st century. Here's Aristotle. Aristotle parts with his teacher Plato in that his metaphysical philosophy does not start with an a priori categories of the universals. You see, Plato has the a prioris, Aristotle does not, and then deduce to further premises. Rather, Aristotle begins with induction, then proceeds to deduction. Aristotle believed that universal forms, essences, substances dwell within various particulars. This is, for example, his theory of hylomorphism. Hylomorphism is a theory that the soul gives form to the body. That's hylomorphism. And as I said, orthodoxy, we don't believe explicitly in Aristotelian hylomorphism, but we do believe in and a variation of it. And Father Deacon and I have talked about this privately. So the idea that the soul gives form to the body. We're not Aristotelian, but there is a hylomorphic like understanding within our Orthodox worldview. Okay. But Aristotle here is breaking with Plato, who says this world is less real than the world of forms, the rational world that your mind can apprehend. That world is more real than this world. Aristotle saying, no, I don't think so. So the substances dwell within the various particulars, and that a philosopher can extrapolate to universal understanding from particular inductive analysis. These two starting points between Plato and his a priori ideal categories and Aristotle's inductive philosophy characterize two distinctive approaches to knowledge in metaphysics. Though it is oversimplification, these two general methods will even be reflected to some degree in the two traditions of German idealism, Platonic, rationalistic, and 19th century empiricism, focused on more of the inductive method, right? The physical world, both of which are forced to re-examine themselves after Kant's important metaphysical critique. Since the time of Aristotle's first principles, there was a seemingly unchallenged foundation, foundationalism, regarding the requirement for knowledge and philosophical claims. Here, let me move this over here. There we go. And philosophical claims. The first principles or first causes were the foundation for wisdom and universal knowledge. All science was and should be built upon these basic propositions that cannot be deduced from any other proposition or assumption. Science, in an Aristotelian sense, was understood to move away from the abstract, a priori metaphysical and rational foundations, these first principles, causes, towards the less abstract and clear observable processes of nature. The human faculty of reason stood as the mediator between the universality of metaphysical principles and the particularity of empirical sense data. From Aristotle and on to through scholasticism, metaphysics was considered a rational science, a foundation to all other sciences, even as Kant stated, the queen of all sciences. In the wake of the Renaissance and the rise of the Enlightenment, new emphasis on both humanism and rationalism began to dominate the enterprise of philosophy. This was to have a profound impact on the break with the dogmatic metaphysics of the scholastics such as Anselm, Duns Scotus, Bonaventure, and Aquinas. This also meant a departure from the Aristotelian-based metaphysics of Muslim philosophers like Avicenna and Averroes. New metaphysical and epistemological questions were being asserted regarding the limits of human knowledge. What is ultimately real and knowable? Now we're putting, again, as philosophy moves forward, they're putting more and more limits on what was actually knowable. What new foundation does pure skepticism bring us? Is it the foundational principles of rationalism or the immediate experience of sense perception in empiricism? In the 17th century, René Descartes and his rational skeptical pursuit attempted to answer some of these concerns by calling into question Aristotle's first principles. Can we truly rely upon our senses to provide adequate knowledge of the physical world? Question. This is why then Descartes locks himself in a room and questions the existence of the exterior world. And that's where he comes up with, again, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He's trying to find the base level of skepticism and challenging the Aristotelian first principles. And he's saying, well, for him, baseline skepticism was, I think, therefore I am. But then he equated an attribute to his substance, and that cogito ergo sum, he's saying that his substance is a thinking substance. Okay. So René Descartes, in his rational skeptical pursuit, attempted to answer some of these concerns by calling into question Aristotle's first principles. Can we truly rely upon our senses to provide adequate knowledge of the physical world? For Descartes, the answer was no, we cannot. Through a method of rational doubt, what's called Cartesian doubt, Descartes sought a new foundational framework to building lasting knowledge of the sciences whose cornerstone is not of a representation of the world through sense experience, empiricism, but rather founded on clear and distinct innate ideas present in the mind and apprehendable through reason. Descartes' support for innate ideas structures brought him into a philosophical lineage aligned with the likes of Plato and Leibniz. What is ultimately real is the innate universal ideas unique to the rational mind. Okay, so what is ultimately real? Like Plato, like Leibniz, it's these categories that we can rationally apprehend in our minds. That's what's real. This world out here, not so much. Not as real as what's in here. In opposition to Descartes was John Locke. Here, let me do this. In opposition to Descartes was John Locke. Following in the epistemological shoes set forth by Francis Bacon, Locke asserted that knowledge comes primarily from empirical sense perception. He directly argued against the theory of innate ideas and instead posited that humans are blank slates, tabula rasas, and only develop ideas through their experiences with the phenomenal world. Ideas for Locke are broken into simple ideas, the mind passively being imprinted upon by sense perception, and complex ideas, the mind's active production of new ideas from the imprinted simple ideas. So you see what's going on there. For Locke, he's rejecting the idea that what's most real are these categories in our mind, that Plato, Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza, they're all a part of that tradition, that rationalistic tradition. What Locke is saying is, no. You're a tabula rasa. Every human being's born as a blank slate. Your sense experience is like it's an impression. It pushes upon the mind and informs your simple ideas. Complex ideas are then rational understandings of these simple ideas, and you can form then more higher falutin concepts. Identifying this fundamental difference between the rationalist school and the empirical school will illuminate the epistemological and metaphysical debate Kant addresses in his Critique of Pure Reason. The works of Locke had a significant impact on the Scottish empiricist and skeptic David Hume. With his very perceptive criticism concerning the circular problem of induction, it is Hume who Kant admits awoke him out of his dogmatic slumber. Interested in the connection between cause and effect, Hume put forth what's essentially called the Humean problem, that being the justificatory basis for inductive reasoning. So what we're doing here, what I'm getting ready to explain, is Hume, the Humean problem. Hume is a skeptic, and the question is, if we are totally skeptical, can we give a justification for using induction? Remember, the idea that a total skeptic can know that the sun's going to rise tomorrow because it's risen every other day. He can't actually say that. He can't justify that truth claim until the sun rises and he observes it. Okay? So the uniformity of nature is the assumption that natural laws, which are currently active, have always been active the same as they are today. This is the Humean problem. The uniformity of nature is a presupposed metaphysical principle that underpins the entire scientific process itself. And this is where, when you see Dyer in a debate with an atheist or something, and he's criticizing the idea of like an atheist. Okay, well, how do you justify logic? How do you justify the law of identity, that things maintain their identity over time? Because as an atheist, only using induction, you can't justify that claim. You're totally out of your bounds once you do that. So the uniformity of nature is the assumption that natural laws which are currently active have always been active the same as they are today. That is a metaphysical presupposition that is not justified by induction itself. You see, Hume argues that we cannot rationally justify the claim that nature will continue to be uniform. Justification comes by way of demonstrative or probable reasoning, both of which come short in justifying this belief. Demonstrable reasoning cannot demonstrate the uniformity of nature, as it is consistent and conceivable that it might stop being uniform. So therefore, as a total skeptic, you can't just say that the sun's going to rise tomorrow, because it is conceivable and possible that the universality of nature in these that these natural laws could change. Maybe the sun doesn't rise tomorrow. Maybe we have 30 days of darkness. So demonstrable reasoning cannot demonstrate the uniformity of nature, as it is consistent and conceivable that it might stop being uniform. Probable reason cannot prove the uniformity of nature based on the probability of the past, since that would then attempt to justify inductive reasoning with inductive reasoning. Thereby, as Hume showed, there is no rational justification for the epistemic certainty of induction. Foundationalism, since Aristotle, has been a method to avoid the problem of circularity, right? The infinite regress. Metaphysical first principles identify a universal starting point for rational apprehension of the particular physical world. Aristotle saw induction as an argument from the observation of the particular towards metaphysical universals. However, for Hume, there are no rational universals. Human minds are the amalgamated imprint of sense perception. Remember, getting back to Locke. Hume is in that same tradition of Locke. Again, so that positivist empirical tradition is going to be like Locke, Berkeley, Hume, these types of people. So metaphysical first principles identify a universal starting point for rational apprehension of a particular physical world. Aristotle saw induction as an argument from the observation of that particular towards the metaphysical universals. However, for Hume, there are no rational universals. Human minds are the amalgamated imprint of sense perception. Therefore, Hume, arguing against the rationalists, posited that pure reason alone cannot prove the reality of efficient causality. Causality for Hume was due to custom and mental habit. This devastating critique to the uniformity of nature, the justificatory process of induction, and the epistemic certitude of causality sets the stage for the work of the Prussian Immanuel Kant. So here we go. Now we're getting into the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. Guys, smash that like for everybody who's still here. Again, if you'd like to show some love, I would greatly appreciate you guys becoming website members for the second half of today's presentation. Again, we're only going to be covering half of this paper. The other half will be on the website for website members. And of course, you can super chat using Streamlabs or here using YouTube, both of which I'd be greatly appreciative of. So here's Immanuel Kant. Kant is often considered the gravedigger of dogmatic metaphysics. Unlike Aristotle and the scholastics of the Middle Ages, metaphysical assumptions were being brought under critical analysis by Kant in a way that had never been done before. With the rise of the Enlightenment, fundamental epistemological questions were being raised about the limits of knowledge by essentially two different schools, that of the rationalist and the empiricist. The rationalists, such as Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz, understood reason and innate ideas to be the chief source of knowledge and justification, privileging the notion that truth is not sensory, but intellectual and deductive. The empiricists, such as Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, rejected the existence of innate ideas and instead believed that knowledge of the world was accessed through sensory experiences, and empirical evidence was their epistemic basis. Okay. As these two strands of thought move forward into the Enlightenment, into the 18th century, it was Kant and his critique of pure reason that marked a pivotal point in Western philosophy. Kant's transcendental idealism will leave both schools of thought transformed in his wake. Rationalism, with its emphasis on innate ideas, will evolve into idealism, governed by a new descriptive methodology known as phenomenology. Empiricism will continue as the hypothetico-deductive model of science that will inform not only 19th century empiricists such as Mill, Comte, and Mach, but also what becomes logical positivism. So that's Bertrand Russell, the early Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein. That's early Wittgenstein. So, okay. Kant's impact on philosophy was a Copernican revolution, and that's what we're here to discuss. Just as the heliocentric model was a paradigm shift, altering the ways in which we understood humanity's place in the cosmos and directed our focus towards the objective world, so too, Kant, almost 200 years later, turns that focus back onto the knower, the person, and with his transcendental methodology gives rise to his 12 a priori categories. The same categories of nature that Aristotle had, 10 out in the world, Kant has 12 a priori innate here in the head, right? So Kant never wanted to destroy metaphysics, but rather fight the indifference towards the subject by his contemporaries, even going so far as to describe the state of metaphysical philosophy as complete anarchy. Kant recognized that metaphysics had not acquired the same rigor as physics and mathematics, which was a shame given the essential role he saw metaphysics having in its relation to human reason. Reason is irresistibly led beyond the limits of the sensible world. Never satisfied with the conditional explanations it finds, reason seeks out the unconditioned, the absolute. Reason is then inherently metaphysical. In the preface to the Critique of Pure Reason and the prolegomena of any future metaphysics, Kant is clearly asking, is rational metaphysics possible or not? Is metaphysics capable of extending our knowledge of reality? For Kant, the chief problems of metaphysics are, does it give us knowledge about the nature of God, human freedom, and the existence of man's immortal soul? These areas will specifically be addressed by Kant later. So what is pure reason, and what is it that Kant is critiquing? Well, since the time of Parmenides and Plato, metaphysics has been considered a purely rational science that seeks universal knowledge claims without any recourse to sensual experience. Consequently, Kant wants to find out if pure reason is actually capable of knowing something outside of experience. Given the fundamental premises of the rationalist school that says yes, and the empirical school that says no, this is a crucial area of investigation concerning the possibility of metaphysical knowledge. Hence, Kant is not investigating whether different metaphysical systems are better or worse than another, but rather the entire faculty of pure speculative reason as an instrument for knowledge divorced from all sense experience. And here's a block quote from Kant. I do not mean by this a critique of books or systems, but the faculty of reason in general, touching that whole class of knowledge after which it may strive independently of all experience. Hence, I mean by this decision about the possibility or impossibility of metaphysics in general and the determination of its sources, its range, and its limits, and all this according to principles. Therefore, Kant's project is critical philosophy by definition, meaning he is critically examining the preconditions, the presuppositions that allow philosophy to make metaphysics possible, analyzing if the epistemological foundations of metaphysics are legitimate, utilizing his, and we would say as Orthodox Christians, they only are legitimate if you presuppose God. So as an Orthodox Christian, we would actually agree here and say, yeah, if you don't presuppose God, you really don't have a justificatory basis for metaphysics. If you do, then you do, right? So utilizing his transcendental idealism, Kant attempts to show that, in fact, knowledge can transcend mere consideration of sensory evidence, but that transcendental knowledge does not reach to the level of metaphysical universality. The mind does have a priori categories for processing sensory input, but these categories are not identical with the innate ideas of the rationalists. Kant's epistemology breaks down knowledge in two different categories, that of a priori and that of a posteriori. A priori knowledge is a knowledge attainable without any impressions of the senses. Oh, hold on one second. Okay. Without any impressions of the senses. This is what he calls pure knowledge. While a posteriori knowledge is a knowledge attained through experience, also known as empirical knowledge. These two categories are important to maintain throughout his system and are further divided by analytic proposition, whose predicate concept is contained in its subject concept. It's in synthetic judgments. So you have analytic and synthetic judgments. Analytic, as I just said, synthetic judgments, a proposition whose predicate concept is not contained in its object or subject concept. Okay, the transcendental aesthetic. In the transcendental aesthetic section of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant begins to argue that space and time are not autonomous concepts derived from empirical experience, but rather a priori intuitional representations. This is to say, space and time are part of our subjective pure intuition of the phenomenal world. Kant argues that we subjectively cognize the objects of experience not as things in which they are in themselves, but as representations, as appearances of the material world. However, this is not to say there is no empirical reality to the existence of space and time. Kant clearly asserts the empirical reality of space as far as all possible outer experiences are concerned, but at the same time, we assert its transcendental ideality, he says. Space and time may very well exist as actual entities for Kant. The problem is we only know them within our own synthetic experience of our a priori categories in the phenomenal world. Kant is therefore limiting the scope of our cognition to the appearances provided by our sense experience. We do not possess cognition of material things as they are in themselves through sense data. Rather, we possess phenomena. That phenomena-noumena distinction, that are appearances as they apply to our a priori categories. Phenomena are the appearances of things that are observed to occur or exist, while noumena are the actual presumed things which constitute reality. Given that we do not know ultimate physical reality in and of itself, Kant is an anti-realist about science. Science based on these premises can only tell us about phenomenon, representations of the world, not the actual noumena, the essence, the substance, the nature of something. Newtonian physics is really describing the subjective structure of our thinking as opposed to the way that the world actually is. Kant's belief that we can only know the phenomenal appearances of reality is an idea that we will be absorbed by both the idealist and the empirical schools after him. By subjectivizing space and time as two forms of sensuous intuition necessary to perceive objects, Kant actually gives room for real moral freedom outside the determinism of Newtonian causality. This is a major epistemic criticism Kant is aiming at the empiricists, and they're overstepping the limits of knowledge claims. Newtonian physics is a deterministic causal domino effect that grants humanity very little legitimate freedom. By subjectivizing space and time, Kant is also critiquing philosophers such as Leibniz, who believe space and time are relations or determinations of things even when not being sensed. Both Newton and Leibniz claim that space and time are independent of subjective awareness. Kant is denying both assertions by arguing that our experience of space and time belong to the subjective a priori categories of mind. However, Kant also refutes the idealism of Berkeley, who posited that space and the things in space are merely products of the imagination. Kant wants to reside in the middle. Space and time might very well be real entities, but empirically, we can only know representations, and transcendentally, we can only know through a priori categories. Kant is not an idealist, but a phenomenalist. Sapio-temporal understanding is the synthetic unity of the sensory manifold of our a priori categories and the phenomena of the empirical world. A priori categories are not universal innate categories as was postulated by Plato, Descartes, and Leibniz, but rather recognized in the synthetic process of experience itself. Therefore, for Kant, neither rational metaphysics of innate universals nor pure empirical knowledge of the world in and of itself is possible. Kant's 12 categories are categories of understanding rather than categories of reality. Aristotle understood his 10 categories to be that of reality, hence they provided an epistemic foundation, foundationalism, to deduce back to universals. From this perspective, Kant actually agrees with Locke, stating that all our knowledge ultimately begins with experience. So now that his epistemology of a priori categories and empirical representations have been addressed, what is Kant's actual stance on metaphysics? What is quite clear from the first two sections of the Critique of Pure Reason concerning epistemology is Kant does not believe that rational metaphysics, as was historically conceived, is actually possible. We do not have access to things in themselves, the noumena, the nature, the substance of something, but only representations of that phenomena. Therefore, metaphysical categories such as substance and essence play little importance outside of being a category solely for our own understanding. Using his transcendental dialectic, Kant goes on to show in his critique that the historic proofs of the metaphysician do not work. We do not possess the certainty of metaphysical knowledge, but we do have a very plausible belief. As Kant states, his project is in a way to limit the dominion and the certainty of knowledge so as to make room for belief. Remember, Kant states the main focus of metaphysics concerns the mind, nature, and God. In his first metaphysical critique, Kant identifies a series of paralogisms, a series of conclusions that do not follow their logical premise, as a method to demonstrate that metaphysical proofs for rational psychology actually go steps beyond the confines of logic. For one of his paralogisms, he takes aim at Descartes, the father of rational psychology, and his famous statement, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Unpacking Descartes' cogito, Kant highlights his underlying appeal to essence and substance, one of the categories Kant has now labeled as limited to an a priori understanding. When responding to his own question of what am I, Descartes asserts that he is a thinking thing. Ego sum res cogitans. I'm a thinking thing. To be a thinking thing asserts that the category of soul substance, nature essence, a universal category agreed upon by Descartes, Locke, and Berkeley, but rejected by Kant. Kant wants to reject res, substance, as universally real for an a priori category that intrudes upon what we can ultimately know, the connection between substance and accident or quality. It's a relationship that is unknown. It is a concept of relation we oppose upon reality. So if cogito, I think, is a property, attribute, quality in relation to the underlying substance, essence, res cogitans, then to begin with the knowingness of a property, an appearance of reality, and from there to deduce knowledge claims about its universal substance is a logical paralogism. It is logically untenable in Kant's framework to make a universal knowledge claim of certainty on the basis of a mere representation of personal experience. You see what he's saying? Kant is saying, look, guys, I get the rationalist school. I understand what you're doing. His whole point is that these innate categories, these realities, these Aristotelian categories, guys, these are actually in your head. And therefore, you can't say I'm a thinking substance because substance is an a priori category and you're making a universal knowledge claim based on your own subjective experience. And he says that doesn't logically follow. That's a paralogism. That doesn't logically follow. It is logically untenable in Kant's framework to make a universal knowledge claim of certainty on the basis of mere representation of personal experience. And here's a block quote from Kant. It is true that I do not thereby know this thinking self any better according to its properties, nor can I thus understand its preeminence or even the independence of its existence from what we may conjecture to be the transcendental substratum of our outer appearances. From the latter is just as unknown to me as the thinking self. Okay. So despite Kant not believing there is any proof for the objectivity of soul substance, he does appreciate why philosophers have been led to such a conclusion, namely the experience of continuity. We experience ourselves as the same thing who thought in the past, who is thinking now, and who will hopefully think in the future. But experience for Kant is merely a synthetic meeting between a priori categories, recognizing the active experience with representations, the phenomena of reality, and never the real things in and of themselves, the noumena. Kant's fundamental point is soul substance, nature, essence, may be real, as well might be the phenomena we experience. However, neither reality can ultimately be proven with rational certainty. You see, he's not rejecting that there's universals, these innate ideas. He's saying, well, one, he's saying all these categories are in the mind, but he's saying using pure reason, you can't rationally justify their existence. Okay. So Kant's, therefore, the assertion of such certainty for Kant is a paralogism. It is an overstep of logic itself. By rejecting soul substance, Kant is not just rejecting innate categories, but he is also hedging against the realism of reductionistic Newtonian determinism. Kant, as promised, leaves epistemic space for belief. He leaves space for human freedom. In the next section of Kant's transcendental dialectic, he uses rational cosmology. Here, his method of attack is by way of antinomies or antinomies. An antinomy or antinomy is an argument that is both for and against a specific thesis, and since both A and not A can be proven true, there is a fundamental violation of the law of excluded middle and the law of non-contradiction. Kant attempts to show how traditional arguments for metaphysical cosmology are in reality logical antinomies. As a result, he believes to prove that these categories are not in and of the world itself, but again are purely categories of the mind that we impose upon the world. Though Kant has four antinomies, or antinomies, you can pronounce it either way, I've heard both, that he shows are foundational contradictions in rational cosmology. We are going to just focus on the first one. The antinomy is in regards to the finitude or infinitude of space and time. Using the reductio ad absurdum mode of argumentation, Kant demonstrates that both the thesis and the antithesis can be proven true. The first thesis is the world has a beginning in time and is limited also in regard to space. So he's making this claim. As true to the form of a reductio ad absurdum argument, Kant will post the falsity of the first thesis. And if the falsity of the premise shows to be false, then the original thesis is true. Kant states, if we assume that the world had no beginning in time, then an eternity has elapsed up to every given point of time. And therefore, an infinite series of successive states of things must have passed away in the world. The infinity of a series, however, consists in the fact that it can never be completed by means of successive synthesis. Hence, an infinite past series of the world is impossible, and the beginning of the world is therefore a necessary condition of its existence. So there goes Hinduism, there goes ancient paganism, there goes any philosophy that posits the universe being eternal. Okay. Analyzing the antithesis, so the opposite of that statement, we see that Kant now attempts to prove that it is impossible that the world has a beginning and must have an infinite past. You see, he's getting ready to logically prove the opposite of both statements. The antithesis, as stated, is that the world has no beginning and no limits in space, but is infinite in regards to both space and time. Kant states, for let us assume it has a beginning. Then, as a beginning, is an existence which is preceded by a time in which the thing is not. It would follow that a time must have preceded in which the world is not. That is, an empty time. In an empty time, however, it is impossible for anything should take its beginning, because of such a time no part, as compared with any other, possesses any distinguishing condition of existence rather than non-existence. Hence, though many a series of things may take its beginning in the world itself can have no beginning, and so is infinite with respect to past time. You see, he just logically proved the opposite of what he just logically proved before. That's an antinomy. Okay. What we see is a logical contradiction. a true antinomy. Kant then feels this is indeed proving that the foundational metaphysical categories of old and in actuality a priori mental categories that we oppose upon the empirical world. Undermining the entire basis of rational and dogmatic metaphysics, Kant goes on to do the exercise on 3 following examples. Kant wants to show that we can prove nothing due to these conditions, such as the infinity of the cosmos in space and time. We can prove nothing about the divisibility as indivisibility. We can prove nothing about determinism or freedom. We can prove that was supposed to be or. We can prove nothing about necessity or contingency. Kant's answer to all this uncertainty is his own transcendental idealism, the a priori categories. The phenomenal and noumenal distinction is upheld in regarding to the certainty of our knowing. Therefore, again, these are simply an a priori categories of our own understanding. In his last section, critiquing rational metaphysics and his transcendental dialectic, Kant now deals with the theology. Addressing the most commonly used historical proofs for God's existence, he analyzes the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, and what he calls the physico-theological, or better known as the teleological argument. According to Anselm's ontological argument, God is a being that necessarily exists. As one would assume, Kant immediately highlights that his argument introduces the concept of necessity. Necessity for Kant is part of the 4th a priori category of modality. As soon as necessity is introduced, we are now beyond the bounds of empirical certainty and in the realm of our own mental categories. God exists. Kant states this is not a proposition. A proposition has a subject and a predicate. When you predicate something, you ascribe a property. Existence is not a property. To say God exists is equivalent to saying God is. To say God is necessary being is for Kant to predicate not God, but necessity, thereby predication of an a priori category. A lot going on there. Don't know if you guys follow that. For Kant's critical analysis of the ontological argument, we can see that the cosmological, the argument that the universe is contingent upon a necessary being, heavily relies upon the validity of the ontological. The cosmological presupposes the ontological. In addition to following a premise that Kant believes has been shown false, the cosmological argument assumes the same a priori category of necessity as it relates to contingent things, as well as to causality. So the cosmological is that something that exists or cannot exist must get its existence for something that does not have the potentiality of not existing. Therefore, God must exist. God by definition doesn't have the potentiality to not exist. Therefore, that which is contingent, the earth, me, this book, these things then must have their existence dependent upon the non-contingent entity of God. This is the cosmological argument. Therefore, rather easily, now let me reread this. So Kant believes that he has shown to be false. The cosmological argument assumes the same a priori category of necessity as it relates to the contingent things as well as causality. Therefore, rather easily, Kant swipes the validity of the cosmological proof aside as built on faulty premise, in addition to its use of the same a priori Kantian categories. After the ontological and cosmological arguments, Kant addresses the teleological argument for the existence of God. Now, mind you guys, Kant is not trying to disprove God, because that's where he gets the metaphysics of morality. He makes the argument for God's existence based on morality. That's where, again, deontological ethics. So he's not trying to disprove God. He's trying to disprove the pure use of rational categories, which, again, as Orthodox, we accept because we presuppose God as a fundamental basis for reality, and therefore we can engage in this metaphysical first Kant speculation that he wouldn't be able to, and then it gets tied to being made in the image of God. Again, the uncreated energies, all these different higher noetic faculties. So our Orthodox worldview doesn't agree with Kant, but it agrees with Kant's critiques of the empiricists and the rationalists, right? So as Orthodox, we're not adopting a Kantian framework, But Kant does accurately critique the rationalists and the empiricists, both not addressing the presuppositions which allow their worldviews to occur. That's why the tag argument, the transcendental argument for God, people want to say, oh, you're just using Kant. No, we're not using Kant. But just because Kant was focused on presuppositional categories of people's worldviews, I mean, he wouldn't describe it that way, but that's what he was focused on. People want to say, well, tag's doing the same thing. Well, yeah, we would agree. In a way, we would agree. So this argument addresses the ontological, and Kant addresses the teleological argument for the existence of God. This argument addresses the orderliness of the perceived cosmos, and so concludes that the form of the ordered unity implies there must be a grand architect. However, to make an argument on the basis of form would to argue on the real existence of the cosmos, the cosmological argument, which depends upon the validity of the ontological argument. Since the ontological is proved false, neither the cosmological nor the teleological arguments follow. Kant then believes to have disproven the historical metaphysical arguments for the existence of God. Why did this not put an end to all arguments concerning the existence of God? Because not everyone adopts or accepts Kant's epistemology. If a person was to reject Kant's a priori categories as purely a mental grid for real universals, as they have been traditionally thought, then the ontological, cosmological, and teleological arguments still stand. Okay? It's Kant's epistemology then that is going to have a profound effect on the later streams of philosophy, such as German idealism and 19th century empiricism. So, anyways, guys, I hope this is following. Smash that like for everybody who's here. I truly appreciate it. And feel free, if you want to show some love, send in a YouTube chat, a super chat, or use Streamlabs. I'd appreciate either one. Okay. So going further here. So what have we unpacked? So let me break it down. What have we just discussed? We've discussed basically Kant's project. Kant's project is criticizing the presuppositions of both the rationalist school. This is the Platonic, the Descartes, the Leibniz, the Spinozas that believe that these rational categories of being, of space and time, of causality, that these are out in the world and we can rationally apprehend them, and we can do it without appealing to God. You see, his critique is not, again, because for Kant, he was actually Lutheran, so he's not against God. In fact, that's what his project is actually trying to make the belief for God. He does it based on morality. Okay, but he critiques the rationalist school by saying, no, all these categories that you guys have, they're not out in the world, as Aristotle said, the 10 categories. They're 12 a priori categories in your own consciousness. And in regards to the empiricists, he's saying, look, you can't prove to me that you know the world in and of itself out in the exterior. Therefore, all you have access to is the phenomena, not the noumena. And so he's criticizing both of these worldviews, the empirical worldview and the rationalist worldview, by showing that both of them cannot justify the premises of their own worldview and therefore must not be true. And he's saying that what is true then is the a priori categories, which most people still don't argue for Kant's a priori categories, maybe some, but the point is his critiques of the rationalists and the empiricists are devastating because they're true. They're true. And that's why I'm saying, as Orthodox, we can appreciate Kant's critique because he puts these people back in their boxes saying, hey, look, you can't just be a pure rationalist. Your worldview actually can't do what you say it does. Hey, Locke, you actually can't be a pure empiricist and a skeptic because you then presuppose the uniformity of nature, which you yourself can't prove. Crap, right? So again, we as Orthodox can appreciate what he's critiquing, although we are not going to adopt Kant's worldview. But this is why it was so important. Despite the inability to prove or know the existence of God in the Enlightenment sense, God cannot be disproven either. After having undermined the epistemological foundations of rational Western metaphysics, Kant then offers a new alternative, a future metaphysic, that being the metaphysic of moral realism. Whereas our a priori categories are realized in the act of experience and perceived in experience with the perceived phenomena of the world, moral truths are objective truths residing outside a priori categories and empirical knowledge. You see, He's saying morality is not dependent on the full knowability of the world in and of itself, the world out here. And morality is not dependent upon skeptical, rational categories of universals. Therefore, he's saying morality and moral realism is the way in which we can find that middle ground. Remember, Kant's trying to find this middle ground of knowability that we can make logical arguments for God. Okay, so let's go forward. By building upon the moral certainty of his categorical imperative, Kant is building upon something that is justified outside of empirical sense data and thereby is not merely an appearance of an a priori category. Instead of focusing on the necessity of ontological argument, which comes to us through empirical sense data, Kant states that moral, quote, laws are imperative and absolutely not merely hypothetical on the supposition of other empirical ends, and are therefore in every respect necessary. A new moral and metaphysical foundation is now established, one that can prove the existence of God. Kant's categorical imperative not only works at the subjective individual level of moral certainty, personal moral knowing, but it also reaches to the heights of universality that implies every person should act according to moral law, universal moral knowing. This is deontological ethics. Kant has found a way outside of his own limited epistemology to rectify a metaphysical, a moral basis for universal and particular knowledge. Logical certainty doesn't exist, as pure reason only allows us to access our own a priori categories. However, moral certainty provides a doorway to a reality not dependent upon empirical data. Just as Kant promised, his transcendental project limited the domain of knowledge and made way for belief, what he called moral belief. Okay. So, though the brevity of this overview of Kant's metaphysics does not do justice to the importance and sophistication of his transcendental project, I now will shift my focus from Kant towards two 19th century traditions greatly influenced by him, namely German idealism and empiricism. And that's where I'm going to stop this stream, guys. The rest of this paper, the rest of how Kant influenced empiricism and German idealism, that is going to be at the website for members. So this is going to, in a sense, conclude today's stream. Again, it doesn't look like we have any super chats. I knew this one was going to be like highly philosophical, and I knew this wasn't going to be my most popular stream ever. Okay, I knew that, but I was hoping it'd be maybe a little bit more popular than it was. But anyways, guys, let's see here. Phone Punk says you can't go wrong with Gregory of Nyssa's Life of Moses or On the Soul in the Resurrection. Agreed. Yeah, Kant is tough. This is not easy stuff. There's a reason why, if anybody who takes like a freshman class into, philosophy 101, so like I remember when I did my philosophy 101 course, okay? And I remember me and another guy on the day that we just read like excerpts from Critique of Pure Reason, we were like, oh yeah, we definitely like Kant. I remember the guy I was sitting next to, we're like, yeah, this one's a lot better than what we read. And the philosopher, the teacher, was like, okay, why do you guys like Kant so much more than Plato, Aristotle, all these different people? And we laid it out, and we definitely were not grasping everything that I just tried to lay out to you guys. This is deep stuff, okay? And again, what Kant was doing is he was existing in the time of the Enlightenment. And again, rationalism and determinism, this stuff was closing the worldview basically to a sort of rational determinism, okay? And like I said, there was two points in philosophy. You have the rationalist tradition, Plato, Leibniz, Descartes, Spinoza, interested in universals. The one is better than the many, right? Privileging universality over plurality. And then you had the empiricists, which were privileging plurality, saying, yeah, I don't know about these universal categories. They're saying what I'm interested in is empiricism. Remember, Locke and Hume believed in simple ideas, meaning that you were a tabula rasa. You are just a biological entity to be smashed up against physical experience. Okay. And so you are then impressed upon by the world, and you establish these small ideas, and then you can have complex ideas by rationalizing onto the world, pressing itself onto your psyche. And he's criticizing both these traditions. He's saying, look, empiricists, you guys actually aren't using the scientific method to know the world in and of itself. And this is like, again, critiquing Newton and Newtonian physics and determinism. And he's saying, hey, rationalists, hey, Descartes, you're telling me you're a thinking substance, cogito ergo sum, yet how can you justify, because he's not appealing to God. Remember, Descartes is not appealing to God. Philosophy, as it gets going after scholasticism, has basically taken God out of the equation. This is why we, using tag, what we're doing is we're dealing with the entirety of the philosophical tradition, okay? Because what happens is eventually we just break down in total unknowability. This is the postmodern turn, right? So in a way, and even though people are still doing empirical science, idealistic approaches to philosophy, various forms of idealism, phenomenology, all this stuff, but generally speaking, there's what's called the postmodern turn. And the postmodern turn is just the rejection of all universal knowing at all. And so the postmodernism, we really don't care about your moral certainty. It's all subjective. The only thing that exists is power. That's the only thing that's real. Everything is subjective. Therefore, everything that's interesting is about power structures, about subjective power structures, right? So, we got a super chat. Let me read that just a second, Devin. So my point, so what Kant's doing is he's criticizing these two worldviews in regards to their fundamental knowability. The empiricist saying, I absolutely know what the world is through the scientific method. And the rationalist, Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza, saying, I absolutely know what the world is through sitting here in my room with my eyes closed and rationally coming up and dealing with the Aristotelian categories. Kant saying, no, I don't really think so, guys. I really don't think so. And so he's criticizing rationalism based on its foundationalism, the observation of nature, right? And he's showing that, okay, rationalists, let me just show you that I can take two arguments. The world doesn't have a beginning and the world has a beginning, and I can logically disprove both of them. Therefore, you can't just sit here with your eyes closed, Descartes, and then logically come to universal knowledge of the world. You can't do it, bub. You can't. And he's saying, hey, Locke, you're measuring and averaging the world. That doesn't mean you absolutely know the world in and of itself, because you can't prove to me that the world is the thing in and of itself. Prove to me that you can't. And Hume agreed. Again, Hume was a more honest skeptic, you could say. And Hume said, you're right. As a total skeptic, I really can't presuppose the universality in the continuity and conformity of nature. I really can't presume the law of identity, part of logic. I can't presume that, because as a total skeptic, I need to be skeptical of that. And if I'm totally skeptical and I'm consistent, maybe the sun doesn't rise tomorrow. I cannot make a universal truth claim as a total skeptic due to induction, because induction requires probability and various things in observation. So you have to observe it and you have to probabilitize it through probability. And you can't do that. And therefore, he's saying, look, you guys are both short. So what happens, and what we'll get into in part 2 over on my website, is German idealism and British empiricism. Because the British empiricists, what they do is they go, well, okay, Kant, maybe when we do science and we use our hypothetical deductive model, maybe we're not measuring nature or the world in and of itself. But we're definitely not accepting the universal categories of metaphysics. And therefore, the closest thing you can come to actually knowing the world is still by using the scientific method. So whether the scientific method brings us knowledge of the world in and of itself, they say, we don't care. What we're going to make the claim is that using the scientific method regarding even studying just phenomena and not noumena, it's still the most, the best, the furthest, the clearest, the highest form of knowledge you can have. That's what's going to lead into what's called British empiricism, 19th century empiricism. And this is going to lead into logical positivism. And logical positivism is going to be, again, a tradition that's related to Bertrand Russell, the early Ludwig Wittgenstein. And so 19th century empiricism is built on three principles. First one, development of the hypothetical deductive method in science. It's addressing foundationalism. So it's saying, now this is the foundation of knowledge, the hypothetical deductive model. Number two is the extension of that method into the human sciences. This is where, like, Augustus Comte comes in, and he's saying, you know what, we're going to scientize all forms of knowledge by using the hypothetical deductive model. Again, this is part of the logical, what becomes the logical positivist tradition. And so then they believe in phenomenalism, anti-realism, and anti-metaphysics. So this 19th century empiricist school says there's only the hypothetical model. We're going to extend it to all forms of domains of knowledge, including the softer sciences, if you will, and that we accept that there's only phenomena. We're anti-realist and we're anti-metaphysics. And therefore, empirical science outgrows the need for metaphysics. We do not need to make universal truth claims about the world because we can just measure and average it. That's what the empiricists, the 19th century empiricism is arguing. This leads into logical positivism and using sort of positivistic linguistic statements to sort of get to the closest claim of truth that we can. However, this all falls apart eventually. And again, in the logical positive, you have the Vienna School. You have all types of stuff, but the positive emphasizes on the objective empirical data, a phenomenalist epistemology. And then William Van Norman Quine, he actually says, you know what? In his Two Dogmas of Empiricism, he says reductionism, trying to reduce all knowledge to empiricism, analytic and synthetic dichotomy. God is good can be both a synthetic positivist statement and an analytic, since God by formal definition is the good. Knowledge, therefore, is a web of belief, or web of belief. And Quine then said, what we need to do is not focus so much on this correspondence understanding of truth. We need to focus on the coherence of truth. If we're all just in webs of belief, as according to Quine, well, then what we need to do is figure out what's most coherent. In regards to the other line of the German idealism, where you get like Hegel, Fichte, all these different people, they're going to take a totally different approach to knowledge. And so, as I said, they're going to use the phenomenological approach. This is no longer interested in syllogistic logic. Logical positivism, very much interested in syllogistic logic. Phenomenology, not so much. It's a process logic. It's a logic of process, of dialectic, of self and other, of mind and matter. It's always focused on the dialectic. This is, again, now you can understand Hegel, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It goes with the phenomenological method because phenomenology is focused on, I'm going to study my structures of consciousness, and therefore, due to their dialectical opposite, the antithesis, I can come up with a synthesis of what the world is. For Hegel, this is his phenomenology of spirit, that the spirit of God is moving through history. Again, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and the universe itself is becoming more and more aware of itself through you and me. So the same awareness that embodies in you is embodied within me, is embodied within the cosmos, and through the Hegelian dialectic, the universe is becoming into more and more knowledge of itself. And that's why the German idealists, like Feuerbach, or he's influenced by it, Fichte, they will reject revealed scripture, because for them, scripture and whatever it's talking about is becoming more and more clear as time's moving on. It's a progressive worldview, right? The world's progressing towards clear understandings of knowledge. This is German idealism. And so using this phenomenological methodology, no longer interested in science. Who gives a shit about the hypothetical deductive method? For the for the idealists. They're interested in studying the structures of consciousness and experience and understanding that dialectically with its opposite, so that they can come up with a better understanding of the world. And this leads into, again, you have Fichte, Schelling, Schleiermacher. So for Fichte, he was interested in like what makes our consciousness the way it is. He rejects dogmatic metaphysics. He wants a transcendental method like Kant, and argues that the nature of the self comes through a moral being. So he focuses on a moral reality. Schelling, more of a romanticist, focuses on aesthetics. And Schleiermacher really focuses more on religion. He was a German pietist. But again, even his religion, he's rejecting the absolute nature of Scripture, for Scripture hinting at truth, but it's becoming more and more clear through this dialectical phenomenological method. This leads into Hegel's philosophy, which gets into, Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy. Again, process philosophy. Now you can understand when you talk about Whitehead and you're talking about process philosophy, you're talking about part of that idealist tradition after Kant that's focused on this dialectical process of awareness moving through history itself, the phenomenology of spirit, you see. And so you get, and then you get American pragmatism, because pragmatism then, and this is really America's philosophical contribution, is with people like, let's see, American Pragmatism. We got Peirce, Charles Sanders Peirce, C.S. Peirce, and William James, John Dewey. These are going to be the three big names. And so they're interested. Pragmatism then asserts the primacy of the practical over the theoretical. You see, then pragmatism is focused. It's like 1 foot within the idealist camp, 1 foot within the empiricist camp. And so like, look, we're not interested in universal truth. We're interested in pragmatic truth. We're interested in things that is the primacy of concrete experience over abstraction. The pragmatist doesn't want to involve itself with abstraction. So they're interested in like the most pragmatic way that solves the problem. It's a philosophy that's oriented around problem solving more than anything. And so, yeah, so then you get pragmatism, and then eventually that leads into existentialism. So again, existentialism, romanticism, this is also a branch that comes out of the idealist tradition. Phenomenology, Husserl, Heidegger, this is another branch that comes out of the phenomenology methodology. You see, so all these different things, all these important schools of philosophy within the 20th century, you can now understand how they develop after Kant into the 19th and 20th century. Okay. And you can understand Nietzsche then as a rejection of these things, right? Because he doesn't make universal truth claims. He does. Again, if you understand Nietzsche, you can't make a truth claim. That's why Nietzsche is always the French intellectuals really liked Nietzsche, like somebody like a Derrida or a Foucault, because Nietzsche is not making universal truth claims. He's saying, yeah, the world is only about power. And that's why these Christians and Christian morality is a slave morality. You need to give that up. And you need to focus on things about the acquisition of power and asserting your will over other people. You know, those French intellectuals then, they're like, yeah, that's right. It's all about power dynamics. And then you can use a Marxist philosophy, which Marxism comes out of idealism. Marxism is just materialist idealism. So Marxism still has the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's just it only looks at the world through materialist and economic lenses. It's the same philosophy of Hegel. It's the same philosophy of the idealist. Marx just took it, being German, right? He just took that and he said, you know what? I'm going to take this philosophical structure, the methodology of phenomenology, but I'm just going to then interpret it and reinterpret it materialistically and economically. That's Marxism, you see. And so that works quite well within the continental tradition. Then the entire European movement of philosophy then is focused on this phenomenological methodology, as opposed to the hypothetical deductive methodology that the Anglosphere focuses on. And that's why pragmatism then sort of puts its foot in both camps and says, yeah, we'll use the hypothetical deductive model if that's what's most pragmatic. We'll use the idealist model if that's most it doesn't matter. they're not interested in abstraction. They're not interested in universal claims. They're interested in the most pragmatic truth that they can say. And that's unfortunately the epitome of American philosophy. That's what we've contributed. So now you can understand better why when we do the tag approach, what exactly we're doing, right? So Jean-Paul Sartre and his existentialism, he's just taking, again, this phenomenological methodology of idealism, and he's just repackaging it in his own way. And for Foucault, you know, he can say exactly his whole thing is about taking a Marxist understanding of the dialectic of the world and then looking at it through power structures. Again, rejecting universal truth claims. You reject universal truth claims. There is no truth. What's left? Power. Now you can adopt a Marxist framework to then look at power dynamics, the oppressor and the oppressed, you know, the black and the white, the men and the women, the sane and the insane. And then you can form all these relationships of power. And that's where they have their sort of revolutionary spirit to then flip these power dynamics. Okay. And so you can see how philosophy plays itself out in pretty interesting ways. So anyways, sorry, Devin. Devin throws in $5. Shout out to you, brother. Thank you so very much. He says, this starts become clear after I read Logos Rising by E. Michael Jones. Great stream. Well, thank you so much, Devin. Shout out to E. Michael Jones. I also have Logos Rising right over there. And I have The Revolutionary Spirit, if you know what I'm talking about. I got both those books by E. Michael Jones. Yeah, I got those right over there as well. So, yeah, you can understand how this plays out. Unfortunately for E. Michael Jones, he's a big Hegelian. He thinks Hegel had logos because Hegel does speak about logos, but for him, logos is like clarifying itself through history. That is not consistent with the Christian worldview. If scripture is true, you can't be a process philosopher, a process theologian, because that would insinuate that the world's becoming more true or scripture is less true than it could be if it was written today. And I think that is an inversion. I think it's a heresy. So as orthodoxy would not accept a Hegelian framework. Orthodoxy would not accept any process understanding of ideas in history. So yeah. Anyways, thank you so much, Devin. I do appreciate it, brother. Oh, shout out to Nathaniel Hill. God bless you, brother. Man, we haven't spoken forever. Nathaniel Hill throws in 2023. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. I truly appreciate that, brother. Coming through right at the last minute, coming in clutch. Thank you, Nathaniel. He says, great stream. Let's talk business soon, brother. Well, thank you so much, Nathaniel. God bless you and the family, man. I hope you guys are doing well. And yeah, we'll definitely have to catch up, man. I'd love to talk with you. So thank you so much, Nathaniel Hill, for 2023, a generous super chat. And also BMX sent in a super chat. Let me address that one real quick. BMX 1966 throws in $10 and says, great stuff. Well, thank you so much, BMX 1966. I truly do appreciate it. Thank you very, very much, bro. And guys, that's going to do it. Like I said, second half of this stream is going to be up over on the website. So if you would like to get access to the second half, Logos Rising, $140 on Amazon. Oh my gosh. Wow. So the second half of this stream will be up at the website for members. I'll be finishing this tomorrow morning or afternoon. So you can expect it up by the time it gets rendered and everything. It probably be up tomorrow evening. So the second half of this stream where we're going to be diving into the nitty gritty of the paper I was writing on German idealism, the method of phenomenology, and 19th century empiricism and the hypothetical deductive model that leads into logical positivism. So guys, thank you so much. And special thank you for those who support. Like I said, guys, I'm struggling here. I'm getting married. My wife is moving here from Europe. I need help. I need help with money. And one of the best things you can do is become a website member. And by becoming a website member, you can get access to the second half of these lectures. And like I said, I have various payment methods. You can purchase a membership for the whole year and save on 2 months free. I'd greatly appreciate it, guys. I would greatly appreciate that. So a major thank you to Gigi for becoming a new member. I need one more for a new emoji, one more member, and we can add a new emoji. Special thank you to Devin Gavaria, and a very special thank you to my friend Nathaniel Hill. God bless you and the family. And thank you so much, BMX 1966, for the $10 super chat. That's going to do it, guys. I will be back potentially tomorrow or Wednesday. Jim Bob, I believe, I'll have to see if he got back to me. Jim Bob will be joining me Thursday. Oh my gosh, we just got gifted memberships from Beyond Seraphim. Throws in 5 memberships. Woo! Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, and Nathaniel Hill throws in $50. Jeez Louise, thank you so much, fam. Gosh dang. Nathaniel Hill, thank you very much, brother, for the generous super chat. Very much. And a very special shout out to Beyond Seraphim for the 5 gifted memberships. Shout out to Bruce Roberts. Shout out to Sumeria Anna. Shout out to Amanda Lee. Shout out to Orthodox Boomer Grandma. And shout out to Dr. Crispy Johnson for becoming members. Thank you guys so freaking much. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Oh my gosh. Thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you so much, brother. Santi's World throws in $10. Shout out to Santi's World. Thank you so much, brother, for the $10 super chat, this super sticker. God bless you, bro. Thank you very much. Thank you. Really appreciate it. I really appreciate it, guys. But that now, I mean, since we're here, that means we can access another emoji. So let's see. We're going to decide on it. Since you guys helped me out, we're going to decide on the next emoji right now. Do we want so I have a few options here. Let me pull it up. George. Okay. Here we go, guys. Shout out to all the people helping me out. God bless you guys so much. Thank you. Very special shout out to Nathaniel Hill. Throws in 7023, a $50 super chat and a 2023 super chat. Thank you so much, Nathaniel Hill. God bless you, bro. God bless you. So here we go. Let me show you guys what we got. We can choose between these. Okay. So can you see this? Okay. So we got a Chad. We got yeah, we got the NPC. Let's see here. This one. We got COTEL. Already got Hulk. I already put that one in. Chad. Terrence McKenna. We got 2 Terrence McKenna to choose from. So which one do we want, guys? Do we want Chad, COTEL, or Terrence McKenna? Which one do you guys prefer? Let me know. Chad, COTEL, or Terrence McKenna face for which one do you guys prefer? Yeah, thank you so much, Beyond Seraphim. Very thankful. Well, we got the Transoe Jack. You guys want Chad? We got PKD's Ghost says Chad. Chad okay, Nathaniel Hill says Chad. Okay, let's download Chad. So we got Beta, COTEL, brother, Chad. Here's Chad. Okay. Okay. Let me upload it real quick. Okay. I really want to use one of those Terrence McKenna ones one of these days. Add emoji. Okay, guys, if you hit refresh, you'll be able to use the new one. So if you guys hit refresh real quick, you should be able to use, we got a new Chad emoji in the chat now. Let's see here. There it is. There it is. Yep. No, we have the Chad. We don't have the words Chad. So now you can put them together like that. We have beta. We didn't have Chad. So there we go, guys. We got new emojis. So thank you to everybody for the coming in clutch right at the last moment there. Special shout out to Nathaniel Hill. Thank you so much, brother. We gotta connect. Shout out to Santi's World for a $10 super chat. Special shout out to Beyond Seraphim, who gifts 5 memberships today. And that's what allowed us to get chat. Yeah, everybody's got chat in the live chat now. So that's going to allow us to do that. If you guys got a good ideas for another one, let me know. I need, let's see how much we need. We need 22 new members to add a 14th emoji. So I need to get 22 new members. But if you guys have an idea on what emoji I should add, let me know. Let me know. So, guys, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. Shout out to Santi's World, Nathaniel Hill, Beyond Seraphim. Thank you so much, brother. Shout out to Gigi and Devin Gavaria. Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. All right, guys, and let me know too if you have another idea for a good emoji that kind of fits with our channel here. Let me know, and I'll add it. So I really appreciate that. Anyways, guys, I am going to get off. I will be back either tomorrow or Wednesday with an open panel. Jim Bob will be joining me Thursday. And so, as always, until next time, God bless.